Hey everybody, it's Chris, the host of Is It Just Speculation, the podcast where we take a look at the gray areas of life, where things are not always black and white or as they seem to be. We cover a lot of different topics with a lot of different people, and so if you like this episode, feel free to check out the other ones, and make sure you follow the podcast for the latest upcoming episodes as well. Glad to have you here. Stick around for more. Hey everyone, glad to be back for another episode of the podcast. I know it's been a little bit of time since our last one, so thanks for the patience. So today we're actually joined by Rachel.e.frazer, who I normally would try to sum up in a short introduction way like I did my previous guest, but that would be doing a disservice to Rachel. Rachel is from San Antonio, Texas, and as everything is bigger in Texas, so is Rachel's aspirations. She has her hand in a lot of different pots, and she's active in a lot of different areas. So I don't want to sum it up into one little short introduction because I can't. So I'll put everything in the description below, including the links to her Instagram, her Arbonne page, and her own podcast, which is on a brief hiatus, but you can get a lot from it if you want to go back and catch up on that. So without further ado, I'll step out of the way and let the conversation start. Buckle up, strap in, put your helmet on, put your knee pads on. Probably oversold it, but it's a really great episode and I had a lot of fun. So stick around and let me know how you like it. So Rachel, definitely glad to have you on. I've been really excited to talk to you because your background is real unique, and I think it'd be really cool to get everybody to kind of be familiar with your story. So if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited that you reached out, and I'm really excited to talk to you. And your background is also really interesting. And I would definitely like to talk about birth stories because I know in your first
yes,
talked about if you have a more wild birth story. So I got a story for you if you want to talk about
I would
that.
love that.
We don't have to go that far back right now, but essentially, my background is I was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, and really always kind of dreamed bigger and wanted to do more with my life. And I always really was interested in music, and I've played the French horn since I was in the 6th grade, so it's always been a big part of my life. And was also interested in the brain and why people think the way they do, why we act the way we do. So I just kind of followed my passions and was always trying to incorporate these two things together. So in high school, I studied music therapy, and I thought it was a great practice and profession, but I knew that it wasn't really for me, and I wanted to do more of the research behind it. So then I pursued a bachelor's in music at Wellesley College in Boston, Massachusetts, near Boston, Massachusetts. And then from there went on to start pursuing my PhD in neuroscience at Columbia University, which is where I currently am right now. So I'm a candidate for a PhD. And basically I'm still kind of figuring out which lab I want to join and what research question I'm actually going to focus on. But I know that it has something to do with early life trauma, how we can treat that and potentially heal that, and then also how we can incorporate sound in some capacity to alleviate stress or alleviate trauma or the effects of trauma. And right now I'm working with mice, but hopefully someday in the future I'll also work with humans because I think it's more relevant for what I want to do with the future.
Awesome. Yeah. And you mentioned trauma. That's something that we've talked about before on the podcast in different episodes, but you're focusing, from what I understand, on transgenerational epigenetic inheritance of trauma. It's a tongue twister, but can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So transgenerational epigenetic inheritance is basically a fancy way of saying how trauma is passed down through generations and how that's genetically encoded in the brain. So if we're all familiar with DNA, and we all have genes and different DNA that we're born with, and sometimes there's mutations, but most of the time that DNA stays the same throughout your entire life. But what happens is that these proteins come onto your DNA, and then they turn that DNA into other proteins, which create your body and all of the cells in your body as well. And so sometimes that process can be interrupted, or there can be more proteins that are created or less proteins that are created from your DNA. And that is epigenetics. And that can change based on your environment, based on how you were raised, based on what you eat and what you drink and things like that. So your DNA stays the same. It's kind of like the recipe book, but then the way the recipe is created and actually made is dependent on environmental factors. And so that's basically what epigenetics is. And then transgenerational is just over time through generations. So not just in one generation, but grandparents to parents to children, then to their descendants, that kind of thing. And so we look at, well, the lab that I was rotating in and one that I want to work with closely in the future looks at how trauma, and like specifically like a shock, like if an organism experiences a shock paired with a certain smell, how they are basically afraid of that smell, and whenever they smell it, they think that they're going to get shocked. So then they actually create more neurons in their brain that respond to that smell. And then that same thing is passed down through their generations to their children and their children's children. So their brain chemistry and like their brain biology is like actually changing because of this experience that they went through in their life.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people maybe don't realize, that things can pass down like that. And it's not just to humans either. I don't know if you've heard it or not, but like they've done studies on trees where they play the sound of like a caterpillar munching on leaves,
Oh,
and the
wow.
tree will react to it, and it'll send out like a chemical that basically makes it unsavory for the caterpillar, even though there's no caterpillar there. So this is something that can be passed down like beyond just humans. So I think
That's
working on,
fascinating.
yeah, it's really weird. Like the whole way that trees are kind of becoming more relevant in like the research that they're being used with, it just shows that they're more like humans than not, even though they're just, stationary from the looks of it.
Yeah.
But it might be more Lord of the Rings type where they're walking around or something. So
You just don't see
it's a
it.
little bit, yeah, a little bit of a mix between the two. But yeah, it's definitely something that happens to more than just us. And I think that kind of goes into your research where you've worked in the past with fruit flies, and now you're working with mice. What kind of research are you doing or have you done with the different animals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in undergrad, I worked with fruit flies, which is very different from what I'm doing now. But it was my first introduction into actually working in a research laboratory, and it was just amazing, and kind of where I fell in love with science even more. And basically, what I would do is just glue flies to sticks and then put them through a video game, and then record how they responded to certain visual stimuli. And so it's kind of like a virtual reality game that we put them in, and they see like different striped screens and like different objects on the screens. And then we record if they are like attracted to those objects or averse. So if they turn away or towards the objects. And then we were trying to see if there were interspecific differences between two different species. One being from the forest, like one species being from the forest and one being from the desert. And we were just trying to see if we knew that they had some differences in like the way that they smelled different odors, because some were like attracted to cacti because they're in the desert, so they like adapted to like cacti, and others were like more attracted to apple cider vinegar, like regular fruit flies. So we knew that they had like differences, but we wanted to like expand on those and see how those differences kind of manifested in their visual capacities, and found some really cool stuff there. But what I loved about that science, and like what I learned the most about that, is just how something as simple as a fruit fly, something as small and maybe like insignificant as we think a fruit fly might be, is so complex and just has so many like layers to it. And depending on their environment, again, like where they grow up and like what they see in their like early life, can completely change their behavior. So that's something I definitely like kind of carry through with me. Like I don't just like looking at one species or like one certain sex of different types of animals. I always like to do kind of an expansive understanding of different organisms and different behaviors and just different strains and species and stuff like that too. And then with mice, it's a new thing. I haven't worked with mice before, so I worked with fruit flies in undergrad, and then I had 3 to 4 different rotations so far at my PhD program, because we have the freedom to do that, which I love. And my first rotation was also looking at sleep in Drosophila and fruit flies, which was really cool because I didn't even know that fruit flies slept.
Yeah,
And
they
I
don't seem
also,
like it.
oh, sorry.
I said they don't seem like they sleep. They're just always flying around like right in front of your face.
I know. They seem so annoying, but they actually they do like rest, and they have like circadian rhythm. And it's really cool because you can like look at their genes, and we have their entire genome mapped out, so we can like alter their genes and make them do different like things and change their behavior based on like what kind of genes they have. And we were looking at like mutants that had impacted their circadian rhythm, and how that infected their survival rate when we like put them under certain stressors. So it was really interesting because we saw like how important sleep is for like health and for lifespan as well. And then I also rotated with a monkey lab, but that was very short. And I didn't actually get to work with the monkeys very much, but I was also looking at like visual stimuli. And I was trying to incorporate music into that, but it didn't really work out, which is fine because that's what science is all about, trial and error. And then, yeah, the third rotation was that one I was talking about with like transgenerational epigenetic inheritance of trauma and olfaction. And now the lab that I'm in right now focuses on somatosensation. So that's basically just touch, and we focus on pain and pleasurable touch. And we use a lot of different cool like techniques and stuff to look at that, but I won't bore you with all the details, but it's a
No, you're
really
okay.
cool lab, and hopefully someday can incorporate sound into this in some
Mhm.
capacity, because I'm super interested in how we perceive sound, not just through the ears, but through the body as well. And what you said about like even trees can perceive sound, I think that vibration is super powerful. And specific frequencies as well. And I think that like our bodies can perceive so much more sound than we um, like to think about all the time.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think you would actually be a good person to ask this question, because you've done different research with different, fruit flies and mice and almost monkeys. But how does, for you personally, how does it feel to do research with animals? Like, is there any kind of like guilt? And just believe it or not, like whenever we started the podcast a few minutes ago, there was a fly flying around me and I Miyagi'd it right out of the sky. And then I thought it was gone, right? And then we're talking and I look down and he's upside down, like legs kicking up in the air for like
Oh
5 minutes.
no.
So I felt a little bit bad just from that. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Like I know I was trying to hit you because you're flying in my face, but also I was not trying to hurt you. Like, is
Yeah.
there any kind of guilt whenever you're doing research and
Oh, that's
maybe putting animals in like a awkward position, I guess?
yeah, that is such a great question. And I'm really glad that you asked that because it's something that I have to deal with a lot as a scientist. And I also have like I'm plant based as well,
Mhm.
so I like it's hard for me to like call myself a vegan now that I'm doing research like this because the vegan community really doesn't like animal testing.
Yeah.
And there are so many like frivolous tests that go on, and people who like are studying drug trials that like never even go to phase 1 or 2 of like being able to be used in humans, but the intent is always always like to help humanity in some way, and to learn more about basic science so that we can somehow understand more about the world and about how we can help people more. And that is always my intent. So it is difficult because I have to kind of make this choice of like, okay, I am choosing to value human potential human lives and human maladies or whatever's going on in humans in order to um, and like by doing that, I am also that I'm working with now is like less valuable than that, which is a hard thing to do. But I always just try to put myself in a really like calm mindset about it and just like make that choice and say like, okay, like this is a life that I'm working with and not just, a frivolous thing that I can just like throw away. Like I try to be very respectful. We're very, very ethical with the animals as well. We have so many different regulations that we have to undergo in order to work with them. And we have people like veterinarians who are constantly monitoring us and like, um, yeah, just always like keeping us in check, which I really appreciate. And also why we can't work with certain animals. Like certain animals are like not used for research anymore. Um, so it is a really like a tough ethical question. I think even working with fruit flies, it was tough for me. Like you said, like you knocked it over and it was kind of
Yeah.
just there. And you're like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't want you like around me. But even with that, like it sounds kind of silly, but I would say like, thank you for your service. Like if I had
Yeah.
to sacrifice an animal or anything like that, like I always like thank it for its service and for what it's doing for my research and also for potentially for helping like our basic understanding of science. And like that can like Nobel prizes have been won like from fruit flies. And I think that's fascinating because it has so many implications for how we can help people. So yeah, it's tough, but
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that, like, I know you're vegan, but I think hunters also do that. Is even though they'll go and kill an animal, they'll, like, as they're processing it, they'll thank it for providing, because it usually gives them for months or up to a year of food, depending on what it is, of course. So I think,
Absolutely.
honoring the life in some way is a good thing, for sure.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with, doing that. I do think it's a little weird how like some life is more valuable than other ones, but like at the end of the day, you're progressing science and helping, humans at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
I can definitely see how it would be a tough thing to balance for sure.
Yeah.
So, talking about music, how do you get so lucky to balance the two things that you are really passionate about? Because I feel like almost always somebody takes a path and it's just that one singular focus,
Mhm.
and then they don't have time for anything else. How did you find the time to have two very detailed things that you have to like focus on and then be able to do both of them at the same time? Because
Yeah.
musicians, jazz musician and neuroscientist, you would think, how do they have the time?
Mhm. That is an excellent question. Something I'm still like constantly struggle. Well, not struggle, but it's constantly something that's on my mind. But I really just always followed what I was passionate about, and I was very lucky that like my mom and I were really close, and she always encouraged me to explore different things and to follow like my passions. And I think so many times we're told that we have to like follow just one path, and that's usually a path that like our parents or society has like set out for us.
Mhm.
Um, and while that works for some people, and I think it like it can be very valuable, and like um I just never like felt comfortable with that. I was like, I want to do more though. Like I have all of these different interests, and I think that integrating like the arts and sciences is so important, and that it wasn't always separate. Like art and science used to be so like connected. Like scientific tales and stuff were like taught like with music. Like people would pass down stories about mythology, which was like how they understood the world at the time, which is like the very early sciences. And they would pass it down through like tales and songs and stuff like that. So I just think that's always been connected, and there was at one point where it kind of split off, and so I'm always like trying to connect them again and see where they can combine more. And I feel like there's also this like quote that you've probably heard before, like the jack of all trades, master of none. Have you heard that?
Mhm. Yes.
So I think it's really popular, but a lot of people don't listen to the second part of that quote, which is but oftentimes better than master of one.
Yeah,
And
I've
I
never heard the last part of that.
Yeah, I don't I think it's a little bit different than that, but that's like kind of how I remember it. Everyone should look it up and clarify, but I really love that because it's like when you limit your view to like only one half of that, it's like okay, like jack of all trades, like oh, you're distracted and you're doing all these different things. Um, but you can be so much more efficient if you like do follow all your passions, because if you're happier that way, and if one thing makes you happier, then you're like more efficient at the other thing as well. And in undergrad, it was really difficult sometimes taking a bunch of science classes because they're so like it makes your brain think a certain way and like very analytical. And it can be kind of like difficult to just do that. So I would like work on a science like problem set or something like that, or like study for a test, and then I would be able to turn my brain to a more artistic endeavor and write about music and write about passion and like things that I'm really really excited about. And it was a really great way to just kind of give my brain a rest and almost cross train my brain. Like we talk about cross training muscles all the time, and like it's like cross training my brain with music, and then also with like hard science. And music can be pretty analytical too sometimes, but I think it was a really healthy balance.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, at some point in their life, if not always, fall back on music as like a way to relax or to, even if they turn on like heavy metal music, they're like, yeah, and they just get the energy out. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's always something that music can put that person into a certain feeling that they want to feel. And there's, obviously music therapy, but what do you see music being able to help that other traditional therapies or music therapy can't help with today? Like, where do you want to take it?
Yeah, so I think that the traditional music therapy that we have today is very valuable, um, and has grown so much over the years into something that's like a lot more complicated than we thought it was at first, because it started with just like playing music for troops from I think World War II, and seeing that it would help with symptoms of PTSD and it would help relieve their stress, and just like playing music with them like obviously had very profound emotional effects. But the more that we learn about science and the way the body works, the more we can understand like what is actually happening to the brain, through the music and like what frequencies are being played. And like you said, like heavy metal versus like classical music, like what are the differences in our way, like the way our bodies and our brains perceive that. And the way I want to take it is just further diving into the biological mechanisms of what's happening. Because I feel like we all have anecdotal evidence of like, oh yeah, music makes me feel better, or music makes me energized, or it can calm me down, or help me get over a breakup. Like there's so many powerful things that we experience in our day-to-day lives, but we don't always know how exactly it's working, and also how to make it more effective, or how to like really target maybe specific parts of the body or specific memories or something like that. Like, is there a way that we can really be more specific with our like a targeted approach with music? And that is kind of where I want to fill in some gaps. And there's also like, even before music therapy, there was like sound healing in countries and places all over the world, which is just also the same thing, like using music in settings that are intended to heal. And like so cool, like meditation practices and religious practices all over the world have like used music for healing ceremonies. So we've known about this power that it's had for centuries, and I kind of want to bring it back to that of like, how is it really affecting the body, and not just like on a brain level, but like on a full body level. And like when you move to music, how is that affecting us? And when we feel the vibrations versus just listening to it through headphones, what's the difference there? So I have lots and lots and lots of questions about it, but I definitely really just feel like I want to kind of dig deeper into how it works on a biological level, and how to make it more effective and quantifiable, I guess.
Yeah, even on the big scale of things, there's physicists that are out there that are thinking that the universe is made of strings for string theory.
Yes.
And the idea is that it's all vibrating at specific frequencies to make whatever we see, like the atoms that we see. So, like, even from the small to the big, there's this idea that music just kind of resonates through everything. And that, maybe if that is true, and, it's hard to say at this time, but if that is true, then of course music would do something to the things that it's made of.
Right.
Vibrations vibrate vibrations. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's an idea behind it that definitely does make sense, like on the small level and up to the biggest level of
Mhm.
things.
I'm so glad you brought
Um,
that up, because that's something that I'm like, when I found out about string theory, it like something clicked in my brain, and I was like, okay, this is so much bigger than just like neuroscience and music. Like I need to work with physicists someday now, like quantum physicists and people who are like looking at the universe, because it's just like, as is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. Like
yeah,
everything that happens on the small scale is like having ripple effects and also happening on a larger scale. And I feel I would love if you have a physicist come on and talk about string theory. I would be so happy to listen to that, because I find it so fascinating.
yeah. If I can pull one away from their calculations, I think that'll work. So if you could set up the perfect settings for your research, have you ever thought about what that would look like? What's your ideal laboratory setting or study that you could do if you had all the resources to do it?
That's, oh wow, really making me dream big here. I love it. Um, I think ideally it would be like I was talking about earlier, like cross species. So I would love to have a large lab. Like I do want to be a professor someday and be able to mentor people, because it's really important for me. I've had so many amazing mentors in my life that I want to be that for other people. And especially as a woman of color in STEM, it's really like not common. So I definitely want to do that. And have just a big lab with where people study different organisms. So like all sound and how sound affects the body and the brain, but from the small level of the fruit fly, and maybe even like worms, like C. elegans. I don't know if you've heard of those before, like microscopic worms. To like the large level of like mice and even humans, and like doing fMRI studies in humans. And hopefully we'll have more advancements in humans that we can actually see what's going on in the brain, which would be really cool. And just having like, yeah, different species so that we can look at the same question over like all these different levels of like biology. And then also having lots and lots of people from different backgrounds who have diverse ideas and just are really creative, and who do have those like interdisciplinary mindsets, and aren't just like kind of one track minded, but who like are really open to like learning about spirituality and collaborating with people from different fields as well. Like, I don't want to just work with neuroscientists. I want to have, like we were saying, like physicists come into the lab and like advise us, musicians come into the lab and advise us, and spiritual leaders and sound healing practitioners, like music therapists, like people from all over the world and all over different like professions and stuff come in and advise us and like kind of add to their research, and just like co-authoring with them, and like not just publishing scientific papers, but also publishing journal articles about that are just more easy for like people to read, because I feel like sometimes scientific papers can be a little difficult to understand if you don't know all the jargon. So definitely would love to have people who can write for the masses.
Yeah, that would be pretty interesting to have a whole mix of different people. And I think that's probably the best way to do science in general, just have different perspectives. Because if everybody came from the same background, the same education, and they get in the same room, they're all going to have pretty much the same idea.
Absolutely.
Like they're all falling back on the same thing that they learned.
Yeah.
So, sticking with the brain for a little bit, do you know anything about déjà vu and what that is? Because I think that's something that kind of always comes up when you're talking about the brain and like why those weird things happen.
Oh my gosh, I wish I knew more. I definitely wish I knew more about like what is actually happening. I have some theories of like why we might experience that, but I don't know if they're scientifically backed. So I'm happy to just like talk about it, but definitely don't take my word for it because I'm not an expert in that field yet. Maybe someday, but I have this feeling that like when you experience deja vu, there's like that sense of like familiarity. And sometimes it feels like, you've been there before, or you've had a dream about it before. And you're like, oh my gosh, like what? Like I've seen this before. And I think our brains are really powerful in that like we can have different experiences with different people and think about all of the possibilities of like being with that person in the future, So if like one time was like standing on an elevator with a friend. I had seen the elevator before and I had seen the friend before, and I had probably talked about the conversation that we were having like before with somebody else. And in my brain, I felt like, oh my gosh, I've been here before. And I was thinking like maybe when I was having that conversation with a different person, my brain was also thinking about the possibility of having it with this person, and also having like the possibility of being in this location because I've like been in these places before. So maybe our brains are just like processing so fast and we don't even realize it sometimes that we like subconsciously think about all of the possibilities that can happen. So by the time like one of those possibilities actually comes to fruition, it feels like we've already been there before because we've already like had the thought about it in our mind. That's just a theory. I think it'd be really cool if we'd be able to like figure that out. But I also am like super open to learning more about like when people think about like the spiritual aspects of that, like maybe if it's like reincarnation or something like that, or like your energies have been together before. And like when you have dreams about places you've never seen before, like I don't understand that.
Yeah, I think one of the main theories that I've heard is that it's just like a processing issue, kind of like when it is a CD would skip and then it would just start playing again. Like you think, like you just perceive it in a different way, and I think it's like tricking the brain. Now on the spiritual side of things, and my mom always told me, and I've never forgot it since, so she'll be happy. But she always told me that deja vu was God's way of letting you know that you're on the right path, like a reminder. And so whenever I don't get deja vu for a long time, I'm like, what am I doing wrong? So yeah, I think that's one of those things that people experience, but maybe don't really have an answer for, which is great. When there's not an answer, that's a good thing because we can go in and study it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard that before, and I also kind of resonate with that. Like when you have that feeling of familiarity, or like this just feels good, this feels right, this feels like something I've experienced before. Whether you believe in like past lives or the universe or God, whatever that looks like for you, like having those little moments where you can check in with yourself and think like I'm on the right path is really, really crucial to following your passions. And I've like had so many of those moments with like music and science that like, or music and neuroscience specifically, that I'm like, okay, I'm on the right path. Like I got to keep going. I've also heard it like synchronicities also as a way to describe those moments. But yeah, I think that's awesome. I'm glad your mom taught you that.
Yeah, it's always stuck with me, so I'm sure she'll send me a message after this. One of the things I've asked before on my last podcast is about CRISPR. And that had to do with if we could cure allergies by switching off or on or off some certain DNA parts.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to apply that to the brain and specifically things that cause trauma, like if we could pinpoint through your, perfect laboratory research, if we could pinpoint through that where those causes are coming from, and if it's just as simple as switching off or on some different parts of your genetics, if we could cure that, should we do that? Or do you think that the world needs to have those kind of traumas to have that other side of the trauma where it's that growth?
Wow. Okay, sorry, my brain is like really processing on this one. That's an excellent question. I think that I love that we have tools like CRISPR, and I think they're amazing for like understanding, how the body works and genes. And but I love what you said about like how sometimes trauma and like going through negative experiences just causes us to grow. And I think that anytime we try to just numb or just like completely erase negative things, they come up in other ways, or like they resurface in other ways, and our bodies like often get confused. So I definitely think that like my ideal lab and my ideal experience would not be just like nobody ever experiences trauma ever and like the world is a perfect place, because it's would be nice, but it's not the reality. And I think um there's nothing, I mean, we shouldn't shame people for like going through trauma or say that's like a bad thing that they've gone through it. Like so many people do go through traumatic experiences, whether it's like high level or low level. That I think the important thing should be on how to like make our bodies, or just help people recover from that trauma and be able to learn from the experience or be able to heal from the experience. And healing is not a one-time thing, right? It's not like, okay, you give this drug and now you're healed. It's like a process that we continue on through our lives and learn how, learn how we can just keep growing through it and recover from it. So I feel like there's definitely some capacities where CRISPR can be used, like whether that's like turning on certain genes so that we have like more resilience or something against that trauma, to where like if we still experience it, but we can maybe like recover from it quicker. That kind of thing would be really interesting. But I definitely do think it is necessary to not just completely turn everything off and like make us numb, because I feel like without shadows and without the dark, we can't always experience the light and really have appreciation for it. So I don't want to say that like trauma is necessary for you to grow, but like, I wish it wasn't. But in some cases, like it is a very valuable learning experience, or it's something that people can grow through and overcome and become a lot stronger because of it.
Yeah, I would say at the very least, it's like a reminder, kind of like scars. And, to give a personal example, whenever I was a little kid, I don't even think my mom knows, and she's going to ask me about it. But, since we're already bringing her up with that in the birth story, whenever I was a little kid, I want to say probably like 10 or 12, I was on the roof of our house, and I had a window that went right onto the roof because it was like an add-on to the main house.
Mm.
And for whatever reason, I thought it would be good to not go through my window to go back into the house, but to climb down from the side of the house onto the fence, go through the back door, go upstairs back to my room. I thought that was a better alternative. So what I did was, hey everyone, it's Chris, the host of Is It Just Speculation? What if I told you that you can make your very own podcast for free, and you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership required? That's Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast, and that's what I use. It has all the tools that you need in one place, so you can record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. So you can work on the go, or you can work at home in the comfort of your PJs. That's what I do sometimes. Don't tell nobody though. Anchor also distributes your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more places all around the world within a matter of moments. That's the beauty of Anchor. It really lets you have a message and get it out there. You have your own voice, guys. It's everything that you need to make a podcast in one convenient place. Please download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. You're missing out if you don't. Start climbing down, and I slipped and I fell straight down onto the fence. But I caught myself on those like sidebars. So basically like an A, and I caught myself on little sidebar things. But anyways, I scarred up all my legs, like all the way up to my thighs, and
Mhm.
I was like so scared I was gonna get in trouble. So I went inside and didn't tell nobody that I was bleeding, and went to the restroom and like, you know, performed first aid. So yeah, it's a reminder every time I climb up on something high or get to the roof. If I ever go to the roof, I'm like super careful. And
Mhm.
so, you know, I didn't need to have that experience, but you know, having the scars is a good reminder that hey, maybe I should not do that thing that I think is a good idea.
Yeah, I'm so sorry you had to go through that, but I totally agree. And like, um, it's funny that you mentioned scars because one thing that, like, on my healing journey, particularly, I have a scar on my face. And it was from when I was a child. It was a birthmark at first, and I didn't really mind it until I got to like middle school. And I started becoming very self conscious of it, and people would talk
Mhm.
about it, and like it just would make me feel really, really insecure. So I started like having such a hatred for it. And even though it was a piece of my body, like I just like despised it. And I just felt so like, I don't know, controlled by this like insecurity. So I like begged my parents to like have it biopsied to see if like we could
Mhm.
get it removed. And it was benign, but there was like some chance that maybe it could grow or something like that in the future and maybe become like cancerous in some sense. So they felt it was, I guess, valid to remove it. And I will never forget like when my brother and sister like saw me afterwards and like made a joke about it or something, and I just
Mhm.
felt this like guilt of like having removed this piece of me, um and just like this like kind of pain for like what have I done kind of thing. Like I don't
Yeah.
mind the scar. Like the scar is definitely a lot less noticeable I think than the birthmark, but it is like this like larger piece of my skin that's now taken up with a scar, instead of just something I was naturally born with that like people call beauty marks, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and for me, like every time I see the scar, it's a reminder of like that time that I let my insecurities and I let like what other people think of me kind of get in the way of um, just like myself and my true value, my true worth, which is not skin deep, you know, it's like so much deeper than that. And now every time I look at it, I'm just like, I have so much more love for myself and like understanding of like, I don't have to change myself to fit what other people think. And like sometimes when you do that, it leaves a scar. And I think it's really important for us to just kind of embrace who we are in general. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, you talked about, and we were talking about just, you know, the scars and reminders from that. And it's not maybe the best way to have a reminder. On the other hand, we have those good reminders. So, you know, talking about your first French horn that your grandpa, I believe, gave you, how
Mhm.
has it been in that time that he gave it to you up until now for him to see the progress that you made over time? Wherever you felt like, wow, this is it. Like I made it. I'm a great player. I'm doing this at this university or at this festival. Like, how does it feel to be able to show him that you took what he gave you and you turned it into this, you know, passion?
Yeah. It feels really amazing. And it's so funny because I feel like I never like, you know, you have grandparents and stuff, but you don't always connect with them like on a base level of like as two humans. It's like, oh, this is my grandpa, like love my grandpa. But I never really like connected with him and much more than that, even though like he had bought me my first French horn. I felt like that was always his way of like supporting me and like supporting my musical journey.
Mhm.
And he would like give me a music stand that he had laying around the house or something like that. And so it was always like these little messages of like, keep going, keep doing what you're doing. And then he would like brag about me on Facebook when I would get first chair and stuff like that. So I always felt like I was like making him proud. And I was like a drum major in high school too, and he was really proud of that and stuff. And then I didn't play jazz for the longest time because I was in classical music, and there's like not really a jazz French horn. It's not very popular to play jazz on French horn, because French horn is like just not a traditional instrument in jazz, but it's also very difficult. So when I got to college and I started learning about jazz, and I was like, oh, this is a great way for me to like connect to um, my heritage. And I think the heritage is really important, especially with like, when it comes to trauma, but also with positive things that are passed down through generations, like
Yeah.
musicality, for example, or a love for music. And I started like studying jazz, and I started like kind of getting a glimpse into like what my grandpa's life must have been like when he was a kid. And then like when I was like, I actually during COVID times when like I had to leave campus, I actually ended up staying with my grandpa for a little bit, and we got to connect on such a deeper level about music and about the impact that it has on on children, because he worked at a predominantly low income school, and I was actually in the district of my same high school. And he just was talking about like the memories of helping, of like how his kids would come together and help each other, and like how important the music was for bringing them together and just like giving them something to be involved with, and rather than getting involved with gangs or bad influences, like having this community of musicians and just support network, and like being able to create something was so valuable for them. And he actually got really emotional and started crying, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly why I love music, and that's why I
Mhm.
want to do research with music, because I know how powerful it's been in my life, and I know it can be powerful in other people's lives as well. And that's actually what I studied more in undergrad. And like with my bachelor's in music, I studied jazz music and resilience in Panama, which is where my dad is from, so also heritage. But um, it was really cool, and I think he's really proud of me for how far I've come, and just being able to see kind of like how those little things are passed down even without knowing it. Like I had never talked to him about this before in my life, and it's been a passion of mine, and then I realized that was also a passion of his. So it's just kind of cool to see how those things are passed down through generations. um, but yeah, it's been awesome, like with having his support. And again, like I've just been really lucky to have that, and like have be in an environment that is really encouraging for that. And those kinds of support networks are so important when it comes to like going through traumatic experiences, and they definitely help with recovery from them as well.
Awesome. Yeah, one thing I did want to point out is how motivated you are. I think you're like a third of the way into like your 75-day
Yeah,
hard challenge.
yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think your motivation is just something that you've carried on from the past. And I think you had mentioned in a previous thing that you did. I've seen so much, I don't know, but you
yeah.
mentioned it somewhere that you almost didn't get into college, or you almost didn't make the program you were trying to, and like kind of last minute things kind of clicked, and then there was that serendipitous moment where one thing led to another. Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
your motivation and kind of how that played into that?
You definitely do your research. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I starting with the college experience and like almost not getting in, and then actually getting accepted to the program. It was really something that I didn't know that I wanted. Like I did not even think about going to school in New York at first. And then I was again following those synchronicities, following my passions, and I typed in like jazz music and neuroscience, and I found a program at Columbia that was about jazz music and neuroscience. And like they have jazz artists come in and talk to the neuroscientists, and they have great conversations about it. And I realized that Columbia was a great place for integrating the arts and sciences. And from then I was like, that's my program. And I just kept telling myself, that's my program. Like somebody told me, like, that's your program. And I was like, yeah, it is. So I just kept like kind of affirming that in my head and really seeing myself being there. And then I got invited for an interview, which was amazing. And I got to meet people and just like see the actual campus and be like, I belong here. I can do this. And I just kept affirming that in my head. And then in February, after the interview had happened and everything, I got a response that I had been waitlisted for the program, which was heartbreaking at first, because it was like, wait, but that's my program. Why am I on the wait list? Like, did they not want me? And there's a lot of like imposter syndrome that goes along with that.
Yeah.
Even though so many people told me like, oh, people get off the wait list all the time. Like it's totally possible to get off the wait list. Um, and it doesn't mean that you're not worth it. It just means that they didn't have enough funding or something like that. But it was always kind of in the back of my mind. And I almost gave up, and I almost felt like, okay, I guess it's just not for me. And then after that, COVID happened. And so I didn't get to further graduate with the rest of my class. And so I kind of just went through like a spiral that summer of 2020, when like kind of the world seemed like it was ending almost. And my everything that I thought I was supposed to do with my life, I was like, what is happening? What am I meant for? I don't know what to do. And then I started like journaling more and really getting into like kind of self-reflection and trying to meditate and things like that, and just working on myself. And I had applied for a different job and didn't I got accepted for this other job, but I didn't accept the offer because the deadline to hear back from the wait list was like April 15th to like make a decision of whether or not you went to go to the school.
Mhm.
And it was approaching that date, and I was just had something on my heart that said like ask, like it just ask, because they had told me that they would keep me updated about the wait list. And so I was like, you know what? Who knows? Maybe there's like an update. So I texted or I emailed the program directors at Columbia and I asked them like, any updates about the wait list? And like, yeah, just checked in with them and they responded to me really quickly and were like, you're at the top of the wait list. We've had this many people accept and this many people decline. We will get back to you soon if we have a spot for you, basically. And I was like, oh, okay, wow, at the top of the wait list. Okay, good to know. What? And I remember just like going into my mom's room being like, Mom, I think I might have a chance. And then on like the 14th and the 15th, they sent me paperwork on the 15th, which was the last day to accept the offer. So I had to make the choice really quickly.
Yeah.
But I decided to just go for it and submitted my acceptance, and then I'm here now. And so I feel like if I didn't have that tug or like that motivation to like at least ask one more time, and if I never had that like knowing that like this was my program and I belonged here, I probably wouldn't have kept pursuing or like actually asked for the update. So I'm really happy about that. And then in terms of like the 75 hard challenge and stuff, it's actually something I've tried to do once before.
Mhm.
I'm also an independent consultant with a company called Arbonne. So it's been an awesome blessing in my life, and it's connected me with like a lot of really cool people who are also motivated, who push you. And so my team was going to do it in January, and I did it for a few days, but I just like had this idea in my head that I'm not a consistent person. And so I didn't finish it. And I was like, okay, I'm not a consistent person. It's fine. Like sometimes I'll go to the gym, sometimes I won't. Like it's fine. And then I was like, why do I think this? Like, why do I have this idea in my head that I'm not consistent? Like, where did that come from? So again, like self-reflection.
Mhm.
And so I started digging a little bit deeper, and I realized that that just kind of goes with like, um, I don't know, stories that I've heard from other people or just ideas that I had about myself that just weren't serving me. And I was like, I can prove to myself that I can do this, that I can be consistent. So I was like, I'm going to do this again. And like, I've realized that you can't, like motivation doesn't just strike you out of nowhere. Like I wish it did, that'd be great. But motivation is created. And when you start doing something for yourself or you start building a habit, then the motivation will follow. And that's something like a big frame shift that I've had to learn, and that this challenge has really helped me cultivate. So I'm on day 28 today. It's almost halfway.
Yeah.
And it's been such a great learning experience in that. Like some of the tasks are super easy, like reading 10 pages of a book a day. Like that's pretty easy. It doesn't take that much time, but it's just about being intentional about when you do it and making sure you don't like not do it one day, because then you'll have to start all over again. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really great how you've been sticking to it. I think one time I saw you doing like a live workout, and I was
Mhm.
like, "Oh, that's cool." And then I went back to doing what I was doing. I think I was working on something, and I want to say it felt like an hour later. I went back on, and you were still doing the same workout. I was like, "What is she doing?" I was like, "There's no way that's still going on." So yeah, it's maybe not mentioned, but it's noticed that you are sticking to it, and I think that's really great. Um, I did want to ask you about music outside of Earth, not the space station, but further out. If there were life on other planets,
Mm.
how likely do you think that it would be that they have music or something that's similar to music? And what do you think it would sound like?
Wow. I definitely feel like if there are sentient beings on different planets, which I really hope there are, like to think that we're the only one in the universe makes
Mhm.
me really sad. Um, but I have a feeling that like there definitely is, especially if like what we're thinking about string theory is like actually correct, and that the universe is made up of like these molecules that resonate at different frequencies, then I have to believe that other beings would also hear this and would also tap into it. And I feel like it would probably be a lot more advanced. Maybe in some places it's more advanced, in some places it's less advanced, but um, I feel like that could be some kind of like people talk about music being like the universal language,
Yeah.
which is in some sense true because there are some things that like we all experience when we listen to music, but there are people who can't hear music, you know, like it's I think it's a little bit of a generalization to say that it's universal, but it is very like it brings people together in a way that I think nothing else can. And I feel like I think it makes me think of like the what is it, First Encounters of the Third or
Oh yeah, with the big light machine.
yeah, and they like play like a tone or
Yeah.
something like that. Like maybe that's what it sounds like. Or maybe it's what some people like John Cage think it sounds like. I don't know if you've heard of John Cage, but he's pretty like futuristic with his music, and just using sound as music, and not just
Mhm.
necessarily like what we think of music as music. But I think sound is everywhere there's air and vibration, right? Like we all hear sounds, whether it's birds singing or it's just like the way like this
Mhm.
fan in this room that I'm in is humming right now. So if there are, or the way the wind blows in the trees, like whatever it is, like I think that like if there are other species out there, they've probably tapped into it, and I feel like I have no idea what it would sound like, but I'd be really
Yeah.
curious to know.
Yeah, that's a good example because I think music usually mimics nature in some way.
Mhm.
You have like loud drums, kind of like a thunder, or you have real soft sounds, kind of like a wind breeze. Like there's different things that mimic what nature probably would do or animals would do. So if there is other life, I would imagine it would probably mimic their nature.
Mhm.
So, if life imitates life, then maybe it'd be something similar to what we have. But you mentioned it maybe sounded like futuristic, like more advanced. This is gonna put me on like the nerd level super high, but there's an episode of Star Trek Voyager where there's a hologram that can sing. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but he's a hologram that can sing, and there's a planet that they've never heard music before.
Mhm.
And so if he goes and sings there, just like on a whim,
Mhm.
they think he's like the greatest thing in the world, and he becomes like a super pop star. And he basically sings like opera.
Oh.
They love it so much that they actually go and create a more advanced version of him. And whenever the more advanced version goes out there and sings, it sounds horrible, but to them, it's mathematically perfect. And
Oh yeah.
even better than what he was doing, even though what he said or whatever he's saying sounded better. So, nerd flag, but it
I
reminds
talked
me of
about
that
transgenerational epigenetics, so I feel like that nerd flag has been passed.
episode. Fair enough. I did want to ask you, is it hard being younger in your field? Because I think
Mm.
the outside perspective looking into neuroscience sees like the typical older scientist who's, a grizzled vet and he's been doing research all his life. Is it harder being younger in that field?
Well, I think it's really telling, like exactly what you just said. Like
Mhm.
when we think of the traditional scientists, a lot of people think like Einstein or, um, you know, the person at Columbia who a lot of people think about is like Eric Kandel or something like that. So we think about these
Mhm.
grizzly, normally white men and older white men. And there's
Yeah.
like this idea of what a scientist should be. And like, there's actually a really great movie that we just watched as a lab called Picture a Scientist, which is about like women in STEM. So more than just being young, I think that's definitely part of it, where it's like sometimes people mistake me for like a lab tech or something because I did just graduate from undergrad.
Mhm.
And I definitely don't have as much experience as some people here. And that can kind of like impact my own like idea of like if I belong or not. Um,
Yeah.
which the motivation helps a lot, and like having affirmations and stuff like that helps me kind of get through that. But it is something I worry about, like if people will take me seriously sometimes. But even more than that, just like as a woman and as a woman of color, and it's there are just so many little things that we don't always think about or that aren't super blatant about people like doubting our presence here or not really thinking that we belong or something like that, or just like walking into a hall of like all these Nobel Prize winners and you see that um, none of them are women of color.
Yeah.
Not a single one, and that can be very, very discouraging at times. Um, but it's also super motivating, and I think that like being young also, and like being from so many different backgrounds, and like having like this weird music thing going on like in my neuroscience career, like gives me kind of like this slight edge of like, okay, I might not know everything that you know in this field. I might not be old and seasoned like you are, and I might not
Yeah.
look the part necessarily, but I have so much more value in this other realm that can add to what we're doing. And I think whenever I keep that in mind and like follow my passions and follow what I'm like, what really lights me up inside, then like I'm able to just kind of like silence those thoughts and realize that anybody who doesn't see me as valid or who might question me is wrong, and I'll prove them wrong someday.
Yeah. Let's go back to the beginning then. Speaking of motivation and proving somebody wrong, let's go back to your birth story.
Ah, well, I actually did record. I have a podcast that is on hiatus right now. I recorded a whole episode about this with my mom. So if you want to go back and hear the whole story, it's quite traumatic. But essentially what happened, my mom wanted to have a home birth. And so we had a midwife and everything, and we were all set to have a home birth. And basically the midwife checked on my mom and realized that her blood pressure was too high, and she told her, like, you have to go to the hospital. I know you wanted to do this at home, but it's not safe, so go to the hospital, and like, we're gonna have this baby there. So we went to the hospital. Well, my mom went to the hospital. I wasn't alive yet, or like born yet, but went to the hospital, and the doctor just tried to keep, like, it's a little graphic, so if it gets too graphic, just let me know, but he kind
No,
of
you're okay.
making her push and stuff and tried to do it naturally. But the midwife, of all people, who, like, midwives are very, very for natural birth, was telling him, like, please, like, we need to C-section her. Like, this is not safe. Like, we need to C-section her. And the doctor was like, no. The nurses were like, no, I'm not listening to the midwife, which, red flag. Anytime doctors don't listen to a midwife, it's like red flag. But essentially it got so bad, and like they gave my mom an epidural because the pain was so unbearable. But she couldn't feel anything from like her waist down or her, like, like torso down. But then she felt this like really terrible pain in her shoulders, and was like, something is wrong. I don't know what's going on. And then all of a sudden, like, my vitals dropped, and they stopped getting a heartbeat on me. And basically what had happened is that I like kind of kicked through my mom's uterus
Okay.
because of all the pressure and stuff like that. So the midwife like grabbed the doctor by the lapels of his coat and was like, you need to section her now. And like something out of a movie. And like finally we rushed my mom to the hospital, to the emergency room, and did an emergency C-section. And I had, my mom jokes about it now because she's like, you always were one to break through the mold or break the mold. And I was like, well, I guess ever since I was born. And then once we got to the emergency room, like they got me out and everything, and I was blue. I wasn't crying. I was completely silent. And my mom was just remembers like praying that I would make a sound. And my dad was praying, everybody was like praying and stuff. And then they like were able to revitalize me, and get my heartbeat go. Like the only thing they could detect was a faint heartbeat. I don't know if you know what an APGAR score is.
No.
It's basically just like an assessment that they take for every newborn of like how their vitals are doing. Like they look at breath, heartbeat, color, like all of these different things. And out of a scale of like 0 to 10, mine was a 1. So it was very, very low. But they did detect a heartbeat. And then finally a miracle, I guess, happened. And thanks to modern science, and also thanks to more natural like midwifery, like they were both able to kind of come together and save my life. And so really, really grateful for that and for the way it happened. But it's just amazing, like growing up with my parents telling me that story and always having it in my head that like there's a reason I'm here. Like there's a chance that I couldn't have been. And it was very, very close. And there's a reason my mom is still here too. Thank God. Like, so being told that ever since I was a little kid that like my life is a miracle and like there's a reason that I exist has been so profound, I think, in shaping how I perceive myself. And I think that we should tell every single child that, because no birth story is perfect. And if it is, like, congratulations, that's still a miracle. Every single time a life is brought into this world, it's a miracle. And I think that we need to like help people realize that. Like, so many times we question our value, or we question like whether or not we're even meant to be here on this planet. And it's like, there are so many chances. The fact that like the sperm and the egg came together to create you is a miracle. The fact that like you were able to go through a whole gestation period, a miracle. The fact that you were able to be born without complications, a miracle, you know? So I just think we really need to keep like normalize calling people miracles, because we all are. And then it's just like it helps a lot with like your self-worth, I think.
Yeah, and that's a great episode. I don't know for sure if that's the one where y'all talk about almost drowning, but I think that in itself is a good story. I'm not sure if you remember what I'm talking about, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good story about trauma and kind of how you face it going forward. So, that's one of those scary things that happens to some people. And like I said, it's your podcast. I listened to some of the episodes and I really was into it. So when the hiatus stops, I will like that.
I appreciate that.
Not a problem. So I did want to ask you about your work with Arbonne. I feel like I owe that to you because I know it's something that you really focus on and you're passionate about. My biggest question is what's different from that versus like something that somebody would automatically compare it to, like something like Amway? Like, what's the difference for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, it's all about the people and the community and everything that the business stands for. So for those of you who don't know, who might be listening to this, Amway and Arbonne are both multi-level marketing companies. And a lot of people have found success in both of them. So I don't want to like talk mess about any other companies, but Arbonne is my favorite. But I was approached by some other people from other network marketing companies before, and it never felt personal and never really resonated with my personal values or with like what I really stood for. And when I found Arbonne, or when Arbonne found me, it just like resonated with every level. So it's a vegan company, it's cruelty-free, gluten-free. We have scientific testing with all of our products. It's not just about quick fixes. It's all about a holistic perspective on health. And those are things that I'm really passionate about. And it's also like, we really care about sustainability. We're B Corp certified, which is a very lengthy process to prove that we are for people and the planet, and not just profit. And it's just on every level, like every time I had like a doubt or like something like, oh, well, what if it does this? It was like, oh, actually it checks off that box. It's been around for 40 years. It's like, has a really like long history of serving people and caring about people and bringing people together, and really empowering people through healthy living. Which I think is just so important and what the world really needs right now. And when you are a part of a company that like stands for values that you are in line with, it's so much easier to share it with others and to just to realize like it's not a fit for everybody. Not everybody is going to need something like this in their life, and not everybody's going to want it. Some people are really, really not going to want it. But it's taught me so much about just unapologetically sharing about myself and sharing, because like you never know who could need something like this, who could need health or like health solutions or a community of people who push them, motivate them. It's like a personal development business disguised with skincare and nutrition is what I like to joke sometimes, because it's just helped me on my personal development journey so much because of the book clubs we do and the training conferences that we have. And it's not just like, how many products can you sell? But it's more about how can you be the best version of yourself so that you can help the most people. Sometimes that's through products. Sometimes that's through a business. Sometimes that's just through touching somebody's life and creating a relationship with someone, whether or not they buy from you. And you never know the kind of impact that you can have. And that's why I love this industry so much too, is just network marketing is so powerful with the amount of people that you can reach and the amount of people that you can help. And so anybody who might be thinking about that kind of thing, just find a company that you really stand for, and that you can really get behind and who shares your values, because I think that is the most important thing, and that will keep you going when times get tough or when people say no.
Yeah. So if somebody did want to order something or try something out, where can they get a hold of you or through your link to do that?
Yeah, so the best way is through Instagram. I am really, really like adamant on my Instagram. If anyone doesn't have Instagram, then also I can give you my email to leave in the description if you'd like.
Yeah.
And then I have my podcast in my link in my bio right now, but I'll probably switch that to my Arbonne link. But I always like to recommend talking to me first so that I can see what your needs are and send you specific links that are tailored to what you might be looking for, because we have a lot on the website and it can be a little overwhelming sometimes. So always love to talk to people first and see how I can serve them. And then from there, I can send more information.
Sounds good. So definitely respectful of your time, so I don't want to keep you too long. For those of you who don't know, she's working right now monitoring a research thing. Am I right about that?
Yes, I can't go into all the specifics of it, but it's very intense. I'm watching mice just do their
Oh,
own
so you're
behavior.
gonna say aliens.
Oh no, I wish.
Expose everything right now. So before we wrap up, what would you like people to take away from our conversation or your studies from today, whether that's music or neuroscience or anything in between?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I'd like to just leave people with the whole idea of like you are so capable of finding a passion and sticking with it. And just I want people to know that like no matter how many people have told them stories about what they can or cannot do or what they are capable of, like just dig really deep into yourself and get in tune with who you are and what you really want out of life, and try to kind of put your blinders on and like don't think about what your parents may have told you or what your teachers may have told you about what you're capable of, and like really dig deeper and realize that no matter who you are or where you come from, like you have value just by the fact that like you are a miracle, like we were talking about earlier. Like you are, there's a reason you're here on this planet, and like the sooner you find that and you can kind of tap into that and just erase the previous limitations that you may have put on yourself and just really embrace your individuality and your passions, like the sooner that you can like serve other people and help the world. So I don't know if everybody's like into that, but I just want you to know that you're valued and you are loved, even if I've never met you before. I love you because you're a human and you deserve to be loved. And I want you to love yourself more. And yeah, just if you want to walk away with anything, it's that. Just follow your passions, love yourself, and love others, and try to make this world a little bit lighter than it was when you found it, because there's a lot of darkness in the world. So the more we can spread some light, the better.
That's awesome. So on that note, I just want to say thank you again. It was really great talking to you, and I had looked forward to it for a while now. Speaking of podcast hiatus, sometimes I take a little bit in between. So I'm
Yeah.
sure people were, wondering like, hey, what's going on with the podcast? But I always try to get quality people like you to be on the podcast. That way, it's worth that time. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day, busy day for sure, to just talk about things.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you reaching out and for following up with me. I really appreciate that. I'm sorry. I know that I'm really busy. I'm not going to apologize for that, but I appreciate you. And I really love what you're doing.
Well, thank you. I hope you have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, just wanted to thank everybody for listening and hope you enjoyed the episode. We have a few more guests lined up coming up, so just stay tuned. Make sure you follow on Spotify, Apple. Give a rating if you want. Doesn't have to be 5, but don't make it a 1. And of course, if you want to check out my Instagram, where I usually post some things about my guests afterwards, and sometimes a little bit ahead of time, just to kind of give people hints what might be coming. That's going to be Instagram.com/Chris Garcia, the real one, not the fake one, the real one. So again, that's Chris Garcia, the real one, on Instagram. If you don't know how to look up the podcast with my links, or if you maybe haven't seen the links, you can go to any place where you get podcasts at. Spotify, Apple is probably the go-to. If you go there, you can just type in, "Is it just speculation?" If you still don't know how to find it, go to Google, type in, "Is it just speculation podcast?" If you want to be real specific, "Is it just speculation podcast, Chris Garcia?" So it's there. It's on the web, on the interweb, on the internet, whatever you want to call it. Just go and search it.